So welcome, this is the screencast for lecture number 2, which was looking at critique and ideology in organizations. And we started off in this lecture looking at what ideology is, then looking at political ideologies, and the claim that we now live in a post-ideological era, which means that ideology doesn't matter. And fourthly, we're looking at how ideology is being understood within organizations and how it's been dealt with in organization studies. And finally, we'll look at how corporations are responding to critique. And when you usually look at ideology, there is a strong focus on ideas. So it is about ideas that are political or economical, and these beliefs are, being used to transform society and transform how people are seeing themselves in society. So starting off here with political ideologies, just to start somewhere, and this is Rosa Luxemburg, who's associated with socialism. So I was showing these pictures just for you to get a sense of what we normally think about when we talk about ideologies. And here is Edmund Burke and John Locke. Edmund Burke was associated with conservatism and John Locke with liberalism, and that's Bakunin, associated with anarchism, Mussolini, fascism, and that's Simone de Beauvoir, associated with feminism, and Ayn Rand, associated with capitalism. And if there's one ideology today that is prevalent, it is the capitalist ideology. So normally when we think about ideology, to start somewhere, we think about it as a form of propaganda. So we associate it with different charismatic leaders, often with totalitarian views, living in society without any democracy, and where they're trying to influence people around one question, one answer, and doing that through an indoctrination. So an example of that is of Kim Jong-il, Hitler, or Stalin. And this is a short video from Kim Jong-il's, not funeral, but just after he died. And this idea is very close to what Karl Marx meant by ideology. Ideology is a way to manipulate reality in a way that it would favor the people in power. And his way of understanding this was to think of ideology as a camera obscura. So for him it's a false consciousness. So an ideology is something that makes people subscribe to beliefs which are false. So Kim Jong-il being able to go around the whole golf course on 19 strokes, for example. So it's sort of based on a set of lies, really. And in that sense, ideology is the opposite to truth, to science, to rationality and objectivity. And also it is connected to class for Marx. So it is the ruling class which determines and would set the rule of what the ideas should be. And in this sense, ideology is something that makes people act against their own self-interest. And critique here is understood as the very opposite to ideology. And this, in a way, is the theme of the entire lecture, to understand how critique, once being seen as the enemy of ideology, to what some people would say now, that the critique is being part of ideology. I'll come back to that argument in a minute. Just quickly looked at the Frankfurt School, which were the first people who started to problematize the relationship between critique, and critique here is associated with different enlightenment ideals, ideals about truth, about science, etc. But they said, well, look, also these ideals could be seen as an ideology. And especially the ideal of progress, constant progress, they thought was in a way blind and was blinding us to see other aspects of our social reality. Now, many people would claim that ideology is dead, especially dead after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. So that's a nice picture of Margaret Thatcher and David Cameron morphed into one person. And David Cameron is, in a way, someone who would claim not to be very ideological. But the argument that we would be exploring in this lecture is that actually also people who claim themselves not to be ideological very often is. So can critique be part of ideology? Slavoj Žižek, who is a Slovenian philosopher, says that yes, and if you look at cynicism as an attitude of today, you would find people who are very critical, but it's still part of an ideology, in the sense that they aren't actively resisting ideology. They may be critical, but nevertheless they act as if they didn't know. So he says, we know very well, but still act as if we didn't. For him, that's an illustration of a cynical mindset, a cynical attitude. And Peter Sloterdijk has made a similar argument and says that what defines cynicism is a false enlightened consciousness. So Marx talked about false consciousness. We are being duped. We are living in an unreality. Peter Sloterdijk says that we have a false enlightened consciousness, which means that we are enlightened, we know these things, but nevertheless we act as if we didn't. So his argument and Slavoj Žižek's argument are very similar. The key for this whole theme is about the new spirit of capitalism, and I will come back to this in a second. But to understand how critique has changed over time, we need to understand how capitalism broadly has changed over time. And so the new spirit of capitalism is a very central text for this topic. Okay, so in this part we're looking at how ideology has been understood in organizations. And we look at 4 different ways. First is to think of ideology in a totalitarian view. So again, this is close to Marx's idea of false consciousness. And there's an interesting article by Hugh Wilmot, which is key on this, where he talks about how people are being duped into believing the opposite of the truth, if you want. The second form of understanding ideology is to think of it as a normative ideology. And this is all about how you can become part of an organization by adopting a set of unitary values. And these are often based on being loyal to the employer. It is being based on expressing emotions which have been promoted and scripted by a specific organization. So if you need as a consultant to subscribe to some beliefs and act in certain ways, a normative ideology is an ideology that forces you, not by way of coercion, but by way of a softer way of you internalizing these ideals. So that would be a normative ideology. And then you have the ideology of the market, and this is close to the post-ideology. People say organizations today aren't forcing you to adopt these values and ideals. The only values and ideals are those of the market. So this is the idea that as an employee, you will never stay in a corporation for a very long time. You will jump to new jobs and you will carry on your career without acknowledging any boundaries. So in that sense, the idea here is that you're free to express your real self, and the only one you're really loyal to is the market, rather than any particular corporations or organizations. And the final one that we look at here is neo-normative control or neo-normative ideology, where there's a celebration of difference. So in normative control, it's about being in the way that the organization wants you to be. Neo-normative control is to be your own authentic self. It's a celebration of difference, being not this unitary or this conformist person, but someone who is more anti-conformist. And fun and happiness are sort of central here. And then you were reading a text, which is an extract from Fleming and Sturdy, and you can find the full text on the blog. I had some question here. And the answers, James Carr.